Hello, and welcome to another honest conversation with Charlotte Dixon from Charlotte Dixon Consulting. Today, I am joined by a wonderful executive coach, Steve. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Charlotte. Good to see you.
Thank you for joining me today. Steve has really understandably decided to stay off camera because, as I understand it, Steve, you have quite a few big clients and therefore it just makes sense to maintain anonymity. Would you be able to tell us a bit more about your background before we get into the nitty-gritty?
Sure. Very happy to do that. And you're right that I have several big name clients, and this is still quite a sensitive topic. So I thought in this particular instance, best to maintain some anonymity. In terms of my experience, several decades of experience in multinational companies, both working in the business environment as well as talent development and latterly as an executive coach.
Fantastic. And actually, maybe that's where we could start. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Sure. I think when I talk to colleagues, when I talk to clients, the overriding sense I get is one of uncertainty. And uncertainty sometimes breeds a little bit of fear. And from that perspective, I therefore think, like many things in today's society, conversations can quite easily become polarized. And therefore, you find that it can be quite sensitive. Some people are desperate to run into the fire, so to speak, and to put out the flames and to take AI forward as quickly as possible. Other people are much more cautious, and there's a range of reasons for that that perhaps we'll get into.
Yeah, thank you. I completely agree. And I'm finding, I don't know if this has come up for you as well, but there is, in some corporates anyway, there's a real pressure to adopt it now. And also, I think a fear amongst leaders that either they're not really sure where to start or they don't have the time alongside all the other sort of normal pressures of business as usual. But I'd love to hear what your experience is of it.
The corporate that I'm working for has developed its own large language model.
Yeah.
It works very well, and there are new elements of that coming on stream certainly every month. It started as what you might expect, a sort of glorified version of ChatGPT, and it was able to essentially be an encyclopedia, and people were really using it as a Google sort of resource. Now we are putting decks together and various other things, and I use it when I think about how I design curricula, how I design specific courses. And from that point of view, I have to say it's been extremely helpful. But when I think about how leadership is adopting it, I think you touched on a really important point, which is where are we all coming from? Everybody is of the view that they can't afford to get left behind. And we've seen this sort of thing happen historically. We can't afford to get left behind. Therefore, sometimes I feel like, do we question ourselves enough about the decisions that we are making? What are the real reasons? Getting left behind may well be a valid argument, but does that mean that we're putting the necessary guardrails in, the thought processes in? Are we using language that takes our employees with us, or are our employees fearful? Because the things that we keep hearing are, it's going to take away all of those boring tasks that you don't want to do. And we've heard that a million times before. We heard it with email. You don't have to write letters anymore. Absolutely true. But now, several decades on from email being the new thing, people are swamped with emails as an example of where technology is going to help us, but actually you could argue it's a hindrance. In this particular instance, I am concerned that the way it's being promoted to people, because corporates tend to use the same language through different iterations, that they see we moved out of big city X, London, New York, wherever the center is, wherever the hub is. We're going to move it to a satellite location, somewhere around North America, somewhere in Europe, perhaps. Then they will move things to less expensive locations. Typically, this might be somewhere like India, it might be the Philippines. This, to some people that I speak to, feels like the next iteration. What's happened in all of those instances is the company says, don't worry, this is just helping you out. We're moving away the less exciting functions. What happens with that every time is that jobs go. And so I do talk to people who feel like they are helping the firm to replace their own job. And I think that is one of many overriding fears.
Uh, just for context, 2024, the message was AI will replace your job. And then this year in 2025, it's been more have it as an agent, as a tool to support you to do your job. From what you're saying, it sounds like for some people that there could be a real fear still that they're sort of almost training AI up to replace them. Is that fair?
Yes, I think it's fair. And some of that comes from our own ignorance. We often fear what we don't understand.
Yeah.
And it's so difficult to convince people that something's the right thing to do when their livelihood depends on exactly the opposite. So that makes it quite a difficult challenge to overcome for organizations. So, how do we take people with us and how do we explain to people what we want it to be? And the language that is used around it needs to be language that all of us, and I include myself in that very much, as a layperson trying to understand AI, AGI, what does that mean for me? Where will it be a help? What should I be concerned about? What should I be excited about? And I still come from a perspective where I am more concerned than excited, but the more that I learn, the more excited I get. We have to get people excited about it.
In some ways, it's I always come back to this, if you believe you can, you're right. If you believe you can't, you're right. And I think it's the same with AI, partly in terms of people adopting it. I think some people are very fearful of it and find in a lot of my workshops with, I'll do a workshop with a leader on digital mindset or on leaders, and they'll say, oh, redundancies is not an issue or not a fear in our organization. And then within the same organization, I will do a workshop with some of the other employees and they'll say, I'm genuinely really worried about my job and whether AI is going to replace me. I think it's the case with AI as well. Like it has so much potential to be used for brilliant things. And I think a lot of organizations that embrace it are really managing to move forward and become more efficient in lots of areas where maybe it would take people a couple of days to do something and it takes AI maybe a couple of hours, if that. At the same time, from those organizations, I'm hearing that that just allows people to say, rather than have three projects, they'll hold six kind of thing, and they'll actually be able to expand the business quicker because of AI. But there's a genuine concern about the risks, and I think that there are real risks there. But it's one of those things where if you focus on the negatives, it's sort of going to stop you from getting very far. AI is here to stay. So that fear, unfortunately, it sort of impedes progress really and squishes creativity, I think. So it's a tricky balance.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think in saying that, I think there's also an opportunity here for leadership to challenge themselves in the way that they communicate with people.
Mm,
So, what you said boils down to that sort of old principle of growth versus fixed mindset.
yeah.
It's kind of a very basic principle. And it's sort of, as you were talking there, it made me think about Dr. David Rock and the SCARF model, which I think we've probably talked about before. It's a very sort of basic take on work-based neuroscience. But the tenets that make up the SCARF acronym are as relevant as they've ever been. What are people concerned about? They are concerned about their status, their job. They have no certainty about their job. They feel as though this is taken out of their hands, therefore, they don't have autonomy anymore. They can't relate to what's being discussed because they don't have the tools or the time to understand what AI is and what it will or won't do. And they often don't feel like they're being treated fairly because they're being pushed in this direction. And if we are to believe what I think is probably going to happen, almost certainly going to happen, which is that AI is our colleague, it will be a colleague in whatever form that is. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to have C3PO sat next to us at the desk. I don't think it's going to work quite like that. But If it's going to be a colleague, we need to understand our colleague, respect our colleague. And if it's going to make up a large percentage of the workforce, the human beings that are still left will need even more human connection than before, in my opinion. So if you are a leader today and you're looking at AI and thinking, this is fantastic, they are of course going to look at what could I do? The high gain question, what could I do if I was able to save the expenditure of 25, 50, 75% of my staff? What could I do to catapult my company into the rest of the 21st century, 22nd century using AI? These are important questions, but you have to be able to relate to the people that are left behind and take them with you. And I am already seeing when I talk to clients, redundancies are happening. I can see that it's happening. These are just the early steps. Maybe it's that they're using those redundancies to help pay for some of the development. I'm not sure that the cost of one person scratches the surface of some of the build costs of AI and LLM machines. But thinking maybe a long way into the future, I was listening to a podcast recently, and the physicist Max Tegmark, I think he's a Swedish physicist, and he has moved from studying physics and he's moved into AI, and he's written this book, Life 3.0. He made some really interesting observations. And one of the observations that he made was that if we are all to be replaced by AI, let's assume worst case scenario that's going to happen. Well, the governments of the world are going to have to find a way to pay us all to do nothing. We can't survive without, or financial systems will have to be eradicated because we can't survive on nothing, and we can't, you would like to think, get rid of billions of people. So if we are all here with no, or there are large numbers of people with no jobs, either they have to find jobs that we can do that are fulfilling, because ultimately people need to be fulfilled, or we are going to have to find a way to pay them not to work. The space in between that is taking us back to where we were before the 20th century, where you had a sort of what was still essentially a serfdom structure, with only the highest echelons of society leading the kinds of lives they wanted to. And I'm not convinced that, having seen what we can be, that the world will allow us to go back to it, or will happily allow us to go back to a world of serfdom, if that's people's largest fear, that we won't have jobs anymore.
And I guess that's like extreme end of the scale. Hopefully we won't get to that.
Yes, it was a bit of,
Um,
I think it takes a few steps forward.
well, on that note, I was going to ask you, what would be your one bit of advice for a leader right now in this digital environment we find ourselves?
I would be encouraging them to ask themselves, what do you want AI to be? Do you want zombie AI, which is arguably what we've got today? If you think about when you go and search on Google, and now it automatically comes up with what the AI response is. Do you want that for everything? And there is no interaction, no interconnection. It doesn't still understand the complexities and dynamics of the human that it's interacting with. Is that what you want? In which case, there's a good chance we're limiting our capabilities. And if we are going to go down that route, then there is a strong case to argue that we are actually putting ourselves as a species in danger, because AI can help us in the future. There's going to be lots of things in the future that will happen that could threaten our environment, whether it's man-made or otherwise. And so AI is something that can help us with that. So zombie AI won't help us with that, certainly not in terms of my understanding of it. So when you're designing it, what do you want it to be? Do you want to design AI like a dog? Dogs are endlessly loyal. We know that dog is a man's best friend, so the phrase says. Well, through millennia, humans have domesticated animals to do work for them. Is AI effectively an automated animal that will do some tasks for us, which might extend from, let's say, from the farmyard where you've got sheepdogs and you've got cattle and things like that that do a lot of things for us if they help to feed us, and horses used to pull plows or whatever it might be. And they simply become better thinking devices. They clean the car, clean the house, all of that kind of stuff that we always imagined about the future, where we'll have lives of leisure. Or will it be something greater than that? Will it have the capacity to think for itself and to experience emotions and make decisions based on something similar to that, albeit that it might be synthetic? In which case, we need to imbue it with, if not at least moral standards, it needs to have some values. And what do we determine those values are? Because I'm not sure, when I look at today's leaders, in whatever capacity they are, be it corporate, be it political, be it technology, be it the super rich, doesn't matter what it is, I'm not convinced that I would want those people, such as I know them, to be determining what the best values are for us to imbue an AI with, so that it makes decisions that are helpful rather than a hindrance.
That has just sparked a thought in my mind of I was recently working with some startups, and one of the founders said, from these workshops, I've realized I've got to rewrite the values and tell people. And I said, do you think maybe an alternative solution might be to have them develop the values with you? So they have that buy-in, and we have that collaboration and that sense of sort of community. So we're all ultimately owning the success of this company. And just, I love that idea of, could leaders use their teams, really draw on their teams' ideas and experience as well as their own to really shape what an AI agent not just does, but almost the perspective of an AI agent in terms of its values. But I do also love that idea of like a pet, a digital pet that sort of is just very intelligent and helps you with what you need, and being very self-selective about it.
To finish off that thought, I feel that one of the things that needs to happen is that it needs the right level of regulation. That's the thing. And regulation doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. If it was government aligned, I'm thinking of something, let's say, well, we're creating GB energy here in the UK. What's to say we can't create GB AI? That is a body that regulates, that is not in government, but affiliated with the government, that is there to ensure that things are built, in quotes, the right way, and then that somehow that is connected globally. Because I do think this is something that's going to revolutionize the world, and I do think it's too important to leave to individual states. So where you have, for example, the post-COVID much maligned World Health Organization, is there a World AI Organization that's a body of people? And the reason that I also say that is, again, things I've picked up from the podcasts that I've been listening to, Max Tegmark and others that they've discussed, is trying to ensure that these brilliant scientists and technologists don't sell out, to take the money and do what they are told to do, which may not necessarily be the right thing. There are countless examples. If we sort of go into this sort of with blind faith that the people in power will do the right things, there's so many examples in the political world, in the corporate world, where wrong decisions have been taken, catastrophic decisions have been taken for profit. Let's just put it as bluntly as that. We need people who are not doing this from that perspective, but are prepared to do the right thing because it makes the most sense. Those people are not, they don't grow on trees, I don't think, but neither do I think that they are that scarce. So we need to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes that we've made with social media, for example, which has changed the global landscape beyond anybody's thinking. When we created social media and put it into our smartphones, nobody could have thought that it was going to shape politics, for example, amongst other things. So if social media was able to do that, then goodness knows what AI or AGI will be able to do. So one of the examples, again, I'm going to go back to Max Tegmark. I can't pass these things off as my own, but he gave this great example of useful regulation, and he gave the example of when seatbelts were introduced in cars. And the motor industry, because their own lives depended on it, were railing against it, lobbying against it. It's a terrible thing. Nobody's going to drive any more cars. actually what happened was that as soon as the public saw death rates plummet because people were wearing seatbelts, car sales increased exponentially. So the way to think of it, I think, which is helpful, as he was describing it, is to think of regulation as a seatbelt for AI, just to ensure that we're protecting ourselves from whatever may come. There are always going to be bad agents. We already have those today. We've had them throughout history. It'll be difficult to keep those things away, but how do we ensure as best we can that we develop a framework for development for creating AI that does what we need it to do, not what it needs us to do, and that is flexible enough that we can also change it when we need to. So I'll give you a very quick example of that. Take something like the Second Amendment in the US. The Second Amendment, when it was created by a group of very specific types of individuals several hundred years ago for a very specific reason. It is still in the Constitution today and could widely be argued to be being abused on an epic scale. And opinion is so polarized, they don't seem to be able to do anything about that. I'm not here to say whether I think it's right or wrong. I'm simply saying that whichever side of the argument you're on, it's become intractable. If we were to put in an AI constitution and put in an amendment about the guardrails, the safety belt of AI, it needs to be such that we can be flexible and change it as the world and society evolves alongside AI into the future.
We've got this incredible potential that's sort of at our fingertips, but there is an overarching need for, don't want to say restrictions, but like thoughtfulness of how within like policies and within like the governmental level and at the local level for organizations in terms of managing it well and making sure it ultimately sits in line with our values and delivers what we need it to. I feel like we could talk for hours on this. It's so interesting. But thank you so much, Steve, for coming and sharing your thoughts and your experience and your knowledge on this. And we'll keep in touch. Stay tuned for the next one. Thank you, Steve.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much.